Hey kids, today we are going to create a dice rolling game. This here is to teach you how to use random number generator along with how to align that with a costume, not meant for you to start your gambling empire. Please code carefully, responsibly, and always legally. Well, what's this game ultimately going to look like? Ultimately, it's going to look something like this. I'm going to have two different dice of my own artistic creation. I'm going to have a variable displaying whatever number is up there on the dice. And I'm going to have some sort of mechanism to roll said dice. And because I'm an overachiever and terrible at math sometimes, I want the computer to tell me what exactly I rolled. As always, we are also playing with house rules. And my house rules say, hey, if you roll two of the same dice, that's snake eyes. So we're going to code that in there as well. How are we ultimately going to create that? Well, if you look and I hit roll, it's going to filter through a bunch of different costumes, add up the two here, and then display it down here. If we get snake eyes, it'll say the number. After a couple of seconds, it'll also say snake eyes. Otherwise, it just adds up the numbers. We're going to have to code in some different costumes, some different variables, and ultimately have to add them up. Best way to learn? As always, kids, let's jump in and do it. Let's go ahead and create our die. We are going to do a new sprite here. Or I guess we can use our cat. If we go to costumes, we're just going to have to create a new one here or delete what is in there currently. One thing we haven't talked much about in this class, because we've really just been trying to get into coding, is how we name things. And really from here on out, you're going to hear me say a lot about naming things properly into something you can understand. Cat A doesn't help me understand anything in the future. But when I'm creating my dice, maybe the number 1 will help me remember that this will be the number 1 die. But let's create that die first. I'm going to go to my box here. Let's create a black object. We're just going to make a square. That looks pretty good to me. Remember, with Scratch, once we click off this object, it is set. So we have to do a good job of making sure we have it where we want. Now I'm going to duplicate this right now because I'm going to want to use this in the future. And I can't recreate this square perfect. And remember how I just said if I click off of it now, I can't do anything without messing something up. So it's just easier to have a duplicate one here. Let's move on to making our circle. We can simply use the circle command right here. We just have to change the color over to white. And we can drag a circle in the middle. Remember what I just said. As soon as I click off this object, though, I'm not going to be able to edit it or manipulate it. That means it's a good idea to hit Control C. That means I can use this down the road and all of my little circles on my die will all look the same. And that'll make it look at least a little better. Once I click off of it, my die is set. Now you'll notice I flip-flopped them here, but that's easy to change. I can just simply rename this one 1. And this is now my duplicate object. Remember, I just want to keep 1 in the background just in case. Let's work on 2. First thing I'm going to do is give it a good descriptive name. This one has 2 ovals on each end. Control V, put one up here. Control V, put 1 down here. So that is my 2. That should give me a spot in the third 2 over there. This time I'm going to duplicate 2 because I want that in the middle there. Again, change the name. This is 3. Control V. And that one goes right to the middle there. And there is my 3 die. 4 really is just 2 ends here. So I'm going to duplicate this one, come down here, give it my name, 4. Click in here. 1's going to go to the edge there. And 1 up to the edge there. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have to do 5. 5 is really just 4 with an extra 1 in the middle. Again, a descriptive name, 5. That one goes right in the middle there. And the last one is 6. We can use 6 or 4 to create 6. I'm going to come down here, a descriptive name, 6. Control V, move that one over. Control V again. Try to get that lined up as best you can. That looks pretty good. I still have this extra one here. I'm just going to keep this just in case. You never know when you mess something up or want to make another die. And ultimately, I can select the number of costumes, so having this extra one isn't going to hurt. And if it does, it's always easy to delete when it does hurt. That looks pretty good for my die. If I come over here, though, you'll notice it's still called cat, and that really doesn't help me at all. I want to call this one Dice 1. Just change the name right there. That looks pretty good. If we go back to our code, we can start coding this up. We probably should. This dice is awfully big, and we kind of want it a little smaller. Let's go back here, and let's change the size of this one to 75%. That's still pretty big. How about 50%? I'm going to go crazy, kids. 65 is probably the winning number. Now we should be able to fit 2 die over here. Let's duplicate die 1 to die 2. And let's move this one over. Now be careful here, kids. Sometimes I switch which one's which. So make sure you click on it. As you can see, when you click on it, it'll show you which die it is. Now that takes care of my die. But if you remember back to my original game, I had a little thing that said roll down here. If we come and choose a sprite, you will see there's one pretty close called button. So let's select that one. I'm simply just going to call this button because I only have one, so it doesn't need to be button 3. If I go over here to the color, I can change the color and do everything. I really want to tell the user what to do, so let's type in roll. Move over that way. This probably should be a black, to be honest. A little easier to see. There we go. Tells the user what to do right there. I think that's all the components I need. It's probably a good time to start our coding. Where should we start? Well, I like to set up my costumes first. That means I'm going to go over to my event. When this sprite is clicked, I want to set this die to number 1. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to create a variable here. So I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to call this dice 1. I also want to make that accessible to everything. So I'm going to make sure I click that sprite available to everything. I want to set this dice number to 0. I also want to change the costume to 1. Now it looks like my number's a little whack out of here. Let's go back here. You can see 1 is called 1-3. Let's change that. Or it's called 1-2. This one we should change to a name that we know, extra, so it knows what that is. Let's go back here to this one. This one did not change. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like I did not check as well as I should have before I finished. Before I move on though, if this was an issue, remember I copied it. Let's go over here. I'm going to have the same issue. Change this one to 1 and then change this one to extra. Now all my dice are named well, and that should help with my coding. Set the dice to 1, and here's my extra. Look how much better that looks, and that's why it's important to name our stuff correctly. When I hit the green flag, that one should change to 1. What I do to one, I have to do to the other. We're going to do a lot of copying in code, so we can just simply drag it over, and you can see when I drag it on top of it, it'll move. When I go to that sprite, it'll be over there. Be careful, it copies it exactly. I have to change this one now to die2. As you notice, there's no variable because I haven't made it. So I'm going to make another variable, dice2. Now it'll switch to 1 as well. There you go. I'm going to move these dice numbers underneath it. You can move it wherever you want. Ultimately, you're creating your own game that hopefully looks a lot better than mine. You can mix and match it all you want. You do not even need to keep these up here. You can hide them if you want. This just helps to check to make sure that these two numbers line up initially. So I'd keep it at least visible until your code is working perfect. Next, I want to be able to hit the roll button. That means I'm going to have to do some coding on roll. Probably all I want to do here is, in the event this sprite is clicked, just broadcast a message. And we'll broadcast our message as roll. That means when this button's clicked, I can broadcast out a message for these two sprites to do something. Coming back here, when I receive roll, something's going to have to happen. What do I want to happen? Well, I probably want this costume to kind of spin around so it looks like something's happening. How am I going to do that? Well, I want to repeat how many times? Let's say 5. And I just want to go to the next costume. Well, we don't want it to go to the next costume because that's going to look pretty suspicious, right? We really want to switch it to a random costume. And this is the first part of our RNG, or random number generator. That means I want to switch this costume. I just don't want it to be next. Remember, I have this extra here. So I want to give it a number between 1 and 6. If you remember from our variables, we have one right here. And we also have one that says pick a random number. And that fits in there real nice. We want to pick a random number between 1 and 6. That means when you receive this roll, this one should spin around 5 times. Let's check that. It looks like it is. It's going really fast. I can't see that fast. Let's put a little wait here. And let's wait for 0.25 or 1/4 of a second. That looks a little more rolly, doesn't it, kids? I like it. Now that's just a costume, and that's really just aesthetics. That's not doing anything. Really what we want to have happen here is we want our die to change some way. So we have to go back down to our variable. And not what's happening in here. We are going to have something separate happen out here. And almost identical. We want this die, or this random number here, to store something between 1 and 6. So I want to store some number between 1 and 6. Right now, these are two separate. This could land on 3, but my number could be 4. And that's not very helpful, right? If I hit the flag, hit roll, you'll see we have a costume of 5 and a die of 3. And that doesn't add up at all. But that's real easy to fix, don't worry. Because all we really have to do is switch this costume over to whatever this number is stored at. How are we going to do that though? Well, I bet I want to broadcast another message. So I'm going to broadcast right here, and I'm going to call this one score 1. When I receive score 1, I just want to switch my costume to what? Well, the variable, die 1. That means when this green flag is clicked, die 1 will be set to 0, and we're going to switch the costume to 1. When roll is hit, I'm going to repeat it 5 times. It could be any number I want. It could be 10. It could be 100. I'm just going to do 5 for quickness. We are going to randomly switch costumes between 1 and 6. The user doesn't know what number's coming up till it's final, so it's just going to a random number. It doesn't matter. I'm going to wait 1/4 of a second so it just doesn't zoom through. Once it does that, I'm going to have the computer pick a random number between 1 and 6 and store that as my die 1 answer. Then I'm going to broadcast that score. Whenever I receive that score, I'm going to switch this sprite's costume to whatever that stored variable is. And since they're between 1 and 6, it's just going to be the costume between 1 and 6. Let's see if that works. 6. Try a couple times to make sure. Ooh, it's blank and 7. Why did that happen? Well, it went out of bounds. We're getting to a number higher than what's there. That means we are going to have to clear the number every time it rolls. Because it clears when we hit the green flag, but not when we roll. So we're going to have to come over here, and we are going to have to set the die number 1 to 0 when I hit roll. 1, 2, 3, 3 again, and 6. So it's working perfectly fine. This just means I cleared the die back to 0. Otherwise, it's going to keep adding. And when it gets out of bounds or over those numbers, I am going to get an error. So be careful of that. This code's looking pretty good. I think I can drag and copy this code over and change it. So let's drag this part over here. If we go over here, we just need to switch everything to die 2 now. I also want to change to a new score. I want this one to be score 2. Let's name it like the other one. Score 2. Same thing. When I receive score 2, set costume to die 2. That looks pretty good. Let's try it out, kids. Stop, reset. Let's roll. 1 and 4. That's good. 5 and 5. Snake eyes. Ooh, 2 snake eyes in a row. 1 more, I go to jail. 4. Uh-oh. Monopoly. All right, it went back. I was getting nervous there. Another snake eye. Looks like we're rolling a lot of snake eyes, kids. Looks like everything's working pretty good. But as I said before, I want my answer to come up on my screen here. So I want my roll here to say something. How am I going to get that? I think I'm going to need to broadcast something here after my score. So after it switches, I think I'm going to have to send something here for it to say. I'm going to go over to my broadcast here, and I'm going to broadcast a new message called answer. Same thing, I'm going to broadcast the same answer over here. Now, when I receive answer, I just want to say something. We're going to say this for a couple of seconds here. 4 seconds sounds good. What do I want to say? Well, I want the answer of this die plus this die. That sounds like an operator. And we have our plus 1 here. And if we go to variable die 1 plus die 2, when I receive answer, it should just say die 1 plus die 2 for 4 seconds. Let's see if this works. Green flag, click it. 4 plus 4 is 8. 3 plus 2 is 5. Looks like it's working pretty good. Only issue I have here right now, it looks like my text is running there, so I'll just move these variables up. Again, I don't even need them. They're just there for me to check my numbers. 1, 3 is 4. That looks like it's working really well. One last thing to do, kids. Remember, when Snake Eyes comes up, I want that to be spoken. How are we going to do that? Well, I think if I set another criteria up using broadcast for it to check for once I get an answer, that should help. How would that look? Well, I'm going to broadcast a new message. I'm going to call this Snake Eyes. If we're doing camel case, this one would be uppercase. See how that works? Lowercase for the first word, uppercase for every word after it. Then you can see it without spaces. So I'm going to use Snake Eyes. When I receive Snake Eyes, I want to check something. That's an if statement. So let's say if answer 1 or die 1 equals dice 2, we are going to say Snake Eyes for 2 seconds. That means after the 2 die are added together, we're going to broadcast a message and we're going to check and to see if die 1 and die 2 are equal. Let's try that out. Green flag, roll. 7 is not Snake Eyes. 9 is not Snake Eyes. No. Nope. Here we have one. 2 plus 2 is 4. And then afterwards, Snake Eyes. Roll 1 time to make sure we don't get one. That is 9. No Snake Eyes. It doesn't come up. Well, that's it, kids. That's what you're creating today. You're creating your very own dice game with your very own dice. What's your requirements for this project? Well, you are going to create an intro screen that explains whatever your game is or how to play it. You need a sprite to start the roll. You need a costume for each of your numbers or variables. You need to store that variable, and you have to make sure whatever number you generate, your sprite matches that number. You need some sort of display or text that has what the added numbers together are. An option for Snake Eyes if both of the numbers match. Your game should reset when rolling again without hitting the green flag. That means I should be able to play it without hitting the flag to reset it. And you need a theme for your overall game. If you want to go crazy, you can create an additional if statement. So when Snake Eyes rolled multiple times, you get a different ending or something else happens. You can also create any other type of house rules you might have. Finally, if you want to take this a step further and you want to create another type of RNG game like coin flipping or various D&D type games, please come talk to me. You're more than welcome to do that. Though rock, paper, scissors is going to be our next project, so you cannot do that. If you want to take this in a slightly different way, just come talk to me. As always, you know I am open to any crazy idea that you have. Those are the requirements for your game. Good luck, kids. I can't wait to see what you code.